Welcome back to Up in the Blue Seats, our New York Rangers podcast from the New York Post. Jake Brown here alongside Rangers beat writer for the New York Post, Mollie Walker. We'll chat with Guinness Book World Record holder, most appearances in the podcast history, Dave Maloney, the great from MSG Network and a former Ranger captain, a bit later. And Larry Brooks, our Hall of Famer, is with us now to start the show and will join on Dave Maloney interview as well. Larry, the Rangers over the weekend could not stop scoring, and that took a pause on Tuesday night, and the Hurricanes showed them a case of reality. What happened Tuesday night? Are you worried that this team can't beat the Hurricanes?
No, they had a bad game on Tuesday night. They played 120 minutes without opposition, really. But I should say, too, that on Saturday night, they forced the Penguins into submission. It's not as if they were playing a terrible team on Saturday night the way they were on Sunday. Nashville is just a decimated team. It was kind of a glorified AHL team. And the goalie didn't make the save.
Mm-hmm.
So Sunday was a different game, but it's not as if the Penguins were fodder until the Rangers turned them into fodder on Saturday night. So but it was not a very competitive weekend, and they came off it. They didn't practice on Monday, skated Tuesday morning, and it was just a blah effort from them. It was disappointing. For this night, for this game, really none of their big guys played especially well, except Shesterkin. They didn't get much from Kane. They didn't get much from Panarin. They didn't get much from Zibanejad. You go down the line. They didn't get much from K'Andre Miller after his big game Sunday. He had a pretty pedestrian one, to be kind, Tuesday. But it was a bad game, and Carolina played very well. Carolina, what I like about Carolina is they generally come with this, you know what you're going to get from Carolina. They're a little bit weakened, certainly with Svechnikov out for the year. Not only a little bit weakened, but severely weakened. Their talent now probably doesn't match up, but they play hard every night, and they're going to be in the Rangers' faces every night. Am I worried that they can't beat the Carolina if they get there in the playoffs? No. They took them last year. They won the first two games of this season series. So it was a bad game. And I would be surprised if they don't come with a much more spirited effort on Thursday in Raleigh. Whether that's going to be good enough to win, I don't know, but I'm sure there'll be a much more substantial team on Thursday.
Full disclosure, I was not at the Tuesday Carolina game, but I was keeping up on twitter.com and probably the biggest thing that's twitter.com. Don't laugh at me, Larry. I would say, at least for me, one of the bright spots was probably Tyler Mott. And I feel like he's been a pretty big bright spot for them in the last few games, 3 goals since he's got over here, right? Just contributing in ways that he wasn't able to last season during the regular season because he also got injured then. This time around, it was much less severe, only missed 2 games. But I love his game, and I love what he brings to that fourth line. What did you see from Tyler Mott on Tuesday?
Yeah, I thought, listen, I think their fourth line is, has a chance to be a real impact line in the playoffs. They're not necessarily big, but they all play with an edge. Goodrow plays; he's a mean guy. Goodrow. VC plays with an edge. I mean, that's when I've talked about this before. When he's at his best, he's playing with an edge. He's in your face, and Tyler Mott is the same way. So they have 3 guys who can get under the opposition's skin. They generally just pitch the puck in and go after it. They make life difficult. And I thought really for the first, 40, 45 minutes of last night's game, they might have been the team's best line. Mm-hmm. They had a defensive lapse. They were on for Carolina's first goal. And things started to tumble downhill from there. But I like that fourth line. It's a good fourth line, and I think when you have a fourth line, it allows the team to balance out the minutes a little bit more. I think that's important. You don't want to be heaping 22 minutes a night on Zibanejad at this point, or Panarin, or Kane, who hasn't gotten to that level of ice time yet. But I like it if if your top line's getting 18. Second line's getting around 17, 16. Sometimes the Trocheck's line is going to get as much as Mika, and then you've got the kids and the fourth line. So I like the rotation. I like the way they play, and Tyler Mott has been a more impactful player in these first couple of weeks than I think he was last year when he came. I'm just wondering what team they're going to acquire him from.
Next season.
Who's he going to play the first 65 games with next year? Before he comes back.
Didn't we talk about this? Isn't he the first player they've ever acquired at back-to-back trade deadlines?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Is that the first player just in Rangers history, or is it like the entire NHL?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder.
I don't know about the NHL. They had a couple of guys like in the early 70s. They brought back a couple of times when they were trading with Detroit, and then they had this defenseman named Larry Brown, not very good. Going back and forth between the Rangers and Detroit. So, but he wasn't involved in deadline deals. And back then, really, the deadline may as well not have existed. I mean, trades were made during the season, and there was no rush at the deadline to bulk up your team. It was the mentality, because of course there was no free agency. I mean, you didn't have to deal with rentals. There was no, so you had your team, and during the season you tried to improve your team, and maybe you did, and maybe you didn't, and then maybe later in the year you looked to make a trade, but there was never a focus on the deadline.
Well, we'll talk about the salary cap in a second, but let's talk about the kids first. They've cooled off a bit offensively, but what did Filip Chytil have to say the other night to you when Gallant gave them a little bit more ice time in the 7-0 win over Nashville? I know you had a good conversation with him then.
Filip talked about the importance of having to prove that they deserve their ice time, and he said, we want to prove that we belong on this team, and he and I have had a couple of conversations about his excitement over the fact that they brought in Tarasenko and Kane and these top players he refers to, and he talks about, this is what we want to win the Stanley Cup, but he also doesn't want to get lost in the mix, and he doesn't want his line to get lost in the mix, and so Sunday night's game may have been an exercise for the final 40 minutes after they take a 6-0 lead, but it was more than an exercise for Chytil and Lafreniere and Kakko. They're competing for ice time now. They're competing for relevance, and they haven't produced. They haven't scored, but they've had a lot of good shifts. They've had many more good shifts than bad shifts. They spend more time in the offensive zone than they do defending. They just haven't scored. And one of the things that was lost last night was that Kakko did score, and he'd gone, I think, 10 straight without scoring. And this one, he went to the net, was able to score on a rebound. So there are better things coming. I think, remember a few weeks ago before the deadline, they were actually being used as the second line.
Yep.
For a stretch of games, while kind of the Trocheck Kreider unit was actually the third line for a while, being used that way at least. So I think internal competition is always good, and it's good when the players competing for ice time embrace it and recognize it, and aren't don't think it's unfair. They don't think they're being treated unfairly. They understand this is it's business, and you've got to earn your time. And I think that Chytil, Chytil's been around he's 23. He's been on the team for 5 years. He understands the dynamics of the National Hockey League. He understands the dynamics of the Rangers. He's an intelligent player who wants to be great, and he understands the steps that are needed to be taken to get there.
I feel like we've talked about this a lot. You got to really appreciate and admire Filip Chytil's attitude toward it and the way that he carries himself in that sort of situation. And you and I have talked about how sometimes when we hear him speak, it's like he could be the spokesperson for the team sometimes with the way he carries himself. And I guess I'm looking way ahead now that we're just on the Filip Chytil topic, but I don't know, for some reason, with the whole salary cap crunch that's coming up for this team, I'm just not sure if Filip Chytil is going to make it through. I feel like he has the most value on the team right now, and that the Rangers jury might see that as, that's his way to alleviate some of the struggles that they're going to have going forward. How do you see it?
Well, I would say this, that they have no depth down the middle.
Yeah, but I know.
So if Chytil were to be a victim of the cap, who's playing? Who's coming? Plus, if one of their top two centers goes down with an injury, Chytil can always move up.
Yeah.
It's not that much of a stretch to play Filip Chytil between Panarin and Tarasenko, right? Or between Kreider and Kane. It's not a stretch at all. If Chytil's not on the team, and of course if Chytil's not on the team, they're not acquiring a commensurate center. Who is their third line? Who is their third center? And I don't want to say third line center, because you can envision the scenario in which Filip Chytil is their second line center next year, and Trocheck, is more of a hybrid checking unit guy who plays third and his penalty kill minutes. I mean, I don't think next year is a long way away. But
they probably can't pay Chytil accordingly.
I'm not sure that is,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm just
not sure what that is, but it's their weakest position in terms of depth in their organization. I just can't imagine going through, and I understand the realities of the cap, and you raise a pertinent issue, and it's something that's going to be a challenge, but going through 5 years of development and just nurturing him, and
I know,
and Filip, they've done it the right way with him. I mean, they have brought him along, maybe a little bit slowly at times, but they've always got their top six, and unless they were to get like a big time defenseman in exchange for Chytil, but even then, I know, it's not as if Brennan Othmann is a center and they say, okay, you know what, we think Brennan Othmann's going to be able to fill that hole as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old next year. Or it's not as if Will Cooley is a center and they say, you know what, we can use Will Cooley as a checking center. They're not. No. So, if they can't afford Chytil, then they've got a serious issue next year.
Yeah. So, I mean, these are just the things that I'm, stream of consciousness thinking, but moving on to the salary cap. You wrote an in-depth piece on the NHL's salary cap and how the upcoming increase might not be the best thing for the players. So in layman's terms, for those of us who have trouble understanding it, what would you say is the latest on that front?
No, well, the cap is scheduled to go up $1 million next year. And that's the way it seems that it's going to be set. It's going to go up to 83.5 unless there's a negotiation between the league and the PA in which the cap would go up like 3.5 to 4 million. But in exchange, the players will have to raise their escrow cap. That's what Gary Bettman made very clear last week when he was asked about it. There's really no reason. There's no reason for the league to ask for this, except this is what the league always does. And, the league negotiates hard every time. They don't They're they like to call the players their partners, but they don't collaborate with the players. They negotiate with the players or against the players.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the players would agree to raise their escrow cap, which is at 6% next year, it would probably go to 9 if, with a $3.5 or $4 million increase. I just don't see the players doing that. I don't see, the incoming executive director, Marty Walsh. I don't see his first order of business giving something back to the league that the players bargained for during the extension in 2020. It's just 3 years ago. So I think listen, it would be better for the league to have the $4 million increase. There's no question about it. You have at least half the teams in the league have been cap distress all year. You have, I think, almost 15 teams needing to go into LTI in order to stay compliant. So of course it would be beneficial for the league as a whole simply to raise it by $4 million. The owners would get their money back the following season. No owner in the league is missing $3 million. Please. It's like me missing, $30. Molly, you owe me $30. But it seems like it's going to be a $1 million increase, and then the year after next it'll go up like 3.5 to 4.5 million. So there'll be a little breathing room, but there won't be any breathing room next season.
Have you ever seen, like in this trade deadline, how many teams acted as a banker? I feel like that was going around, that no one had seen that many transactions of that unfold before until this season.
And that's a function of function of half the teams in the league being up against the cap, and not even to the point where teams couldn't even afford 50% of the cap of the players they were obtaining.
Needed two teams to retain salary.
They had to whittle it down to 25%. So that just tells you the state of distress that the contending teams are in the NHL. And I've always I've always believed that the cap is meant to punish successful teams. Successful teams carry the flagship for the league.
Right.
Yeah, but they don't want that. The NHL wants 32 500 teams.
Sticking to dollar menu dinners across the NHL, McDoubles for everyone. Larry Brooks, NYP_Brooksy on Twitter. We'll not say goodbye because he'll join us in a minute for Dave Maloney next. All right, we're backing up in the blue seats. Jake Brown, Mollie Walker, Larry Brooks joining us for an interview with a guy who on Zoom is called Grandpa, but we call him Captain, Ranger legend, MSG Network analyst, Dave Maloney, the most appearances on the show of all time. Dave, you weren't at the wine shop this morning. You were working out. What are you getting buff for us for TV?
Yeah. It's not quite that, but no, the wine. Actually, I'm going to fill in for him when he goes on vacation for 2 weeks in July. But other than that, I'm free. So it's all good. Just another day in the life of La La Land here. So it's all good.
Was this Zoom
identifier from FaceTiming with your grandkids?
Yes, it was. You're right. I was on FaceTime with my granddaughter, Ella. She'll be 2 April 3rd. And the boys haven't quite figured it out yet. My 2 grandsons. So it's, you women, you're always smarter than us guys and stuff like that, I guess.
Gotta have the right identifier. Gotta have the right identifier.
Right.
All right. Well, moseying on into Rangers land. I feel like whenever we're just, around the rink, watching practice, just schmoozing, I feel like you've always had a lot of thoughts about the power play and where guys should be, what you think their setup should be. So I'm just curious, what would you say now that the 2 power plays have been kind of split up and balanced a bit with their new phases? What's your perfect alignment?
Well, they don't. I think, first of all, I think Mika should be in the first rotation. As somebody that's going to, at least threaten with some sort of force off the wing position, right?
It's pretty crazy that he's not right now.
And he does have 19 power play goals, and one unit looks like they're would be inclined to at least give a shot a try. And the second unit looks like the Panarin unit looks like it, or the Kane unit looks like it'd like to kind of pass it to the back of the net. And Tarasenko's the other guy that can. So you got Tarasenko and Mika on the same power play, and they're two guys. That's right? They're on the same. The two guys I think are more
until last night, which
well,
they called the timeout in the third period, and they switched the units. So what I'm curious at, I'm going to practice later. Because they moved Kreider and Mika up to the unit with Panarin and Kane and Fox. So I wonder, was this a one-time thing for this one game, or are they remaking their power play units? Because I agree with you. I think listen. They have riches of power play talent,
right.
But Mika Zibanejad needs to be on the first unit. Mika Zibanejad needs to be on, for a minute 20. I'm not sitting Zibanejad on the bench for a power play.
Well, last night, Carolina is a wonderfully coached and wonderfully executed defensive team. I mean, they took the middle of the ice away from them coming up ice, which doesn't really affect Mika until you get into the offensive zone. And actually, they took a lot of this play away in the offensive zone also. So it'll be curious to see what kind of adjustments can be made to that. But they just, last night they never had a sniff on the power play. But I think you've got to acknowledge Carolina as being pretty good penalty killer. So maybe that switch up was trying to figure out how they could penetrate the defense of Carolina. And again, what they do is when Adam walks it up and slows it down, they kind of clogged that middle and took all the middle away from anybody that was coming from behind. So, and then, they're pretty aggressive in the defensive zone. That blue line is good, and they're a wonderfully coached defensive team. So I think you have to kind of, and then you got a little bit spoiled playing, teams that played since they played Boston who really don't defend as well as those two teams. But you're going to have to figure it out one way or the other, right?
I feel like we've seen it a lot this season where teams are figuring out that pushing the Rangers to the perimeter is the easiest and simplest way to stifle any sort of their offensive power. Are you guys seeing the same thing? I feel like they've just been shoved to the outside, and clogging up the middle is the easiest scouting report for any team that's trying to defend the Rangers power play.
Well, I would certainly think so. And then what happens when you play against the better teams, they have better players to execute.
Yeah.
They're just better teams for reasons. And that's why when you play against Boston or you play against Carolina, particularly the Islanders, who play a system and have players that are capable of playing that system that requires good reads, it requires the getting to position, and it requires all those things. There's no question that if you can take away the outside game in the offensive zone from the Rangers, you're going to have a better chance. And that's where, I don't know. What do you think, Larry?
Well, I agree. But, it's they also have a power play or the first unit or the first unit and a half, if Adams stays out, through the switch. They don't really have a threat from the point. They don't have a shot.
No, they don't. Right.
Which is the dynamic changes when Trouba comes on the ice for the final 20, 35 seconds of a power play. And Adams, as applies to so many people in so many situations, Adams' great strengths, probably one of his weaknesses too. He just doesn't have a shot. So teams don't really have to defend against the shot and then the rebound and then, the chaos that ensues off the rebound. I think they're still figuring it out but I don't think the units we've seen over the last week are going to be the units we see going to the playoffs, because honestly, I cannot imagine them starting the playoffs with Zibanejad on a 1B unit. I
Mhm.
just see that, and to a certain extent to Kreider as well.
Yeah.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. I
I'm
agree.
not sure. I mean, Chris probably could have 55 by now. I mean, look at his shooting percentage on the power play, and shooting percentage for him on the power play just means how many times he touches the puck,
Around the net, right?
Right. He's not shooting; he's deflecting. He's
Right.
redirecting.
Right.
Here, his shooting percentage on the power play was about 40%. This year, it's about 10, and the 10 seems to be more of an aberration than the 40. So when you get away from Mika on the left and Chris in front, you're changing what they've done for the last 3 years.
Right.
And it's difficult to change at this point in the season. They're trying to incorporate Tarasenko and Kane. Obviously, they want to make space for them. But I'm more comfortable with a power play that has Mika in the left circle and Kreider in front.
Right. Kreider in front. Yeah. I mean, that's they're afforded the opportunity to experiment a little bit, but I mean, the reality is the competition gets better postseason. The ability to defend gets better, and special teams will play the role they play. They're pretty important.
Sticking with the theme.
Penalty kill has been terrific, though.
Yeah. Well,
No,
listen,
so good.
I think even last night, I thought they defended well too. I mean,
so they got lost
again,
a couple of times, but
you're going to get lost against that team. So how did it cost? What did it ultimately cost you? Well, I mean, it was a bad turn by Keandre on the Chatfield goal. If he turns to the outside on that one, it's a fundamental defensive play. Turn to the outside. By the time he turns to the inside and turns around, Chatfield's by him. And then it was a bad read on the other one when he chased the puck into the corner. He's already there. So but in games when they're tight like that, that's going to be the difference, is one little play, one little misread and things like that, which I think they've been much, much better defensively. And you're going to be under pressure against Carolina. There's no question. Just that's a given. And it's just a matter of can you be in the right position and make the right decision, because one wrong decision is probably going to cost you over the course of a series or a game.
Sticking with the topic of Patrick Kane and Vladimir Tarasenko and their transition into the Rangers, Dave, I'm curious, with two players who have played their whole career with one team, you were kind of the same way with your career. You went and played for the Sabres in your last season in the NHL. What was the weirdest thing for you when you went to the Sabres, or what sticks out to you? What do you remember the most about your transition that you had to acclimate to or figure out?
Well, it's funny, Molly. I think the transition going from New York to Buffalo for me would have been a lot easier than anybody coming to New York.
Right.
Because it is so. There's two things that stick out as you're posing the question. The first is I would ask, how far is the rink? It's 10 minutes. How far is the practice rink? It's 10 minutes. How far is the airport? It's 10 minutes. You're like, is there any place that's further than 10 minutes away? And then the second thing, believe it or not, was guys you played against I thought were idiots, and you get to play with them and they're just the best guys ever, and we're all the same. So I think it's particularly, and listen, I'm particularly Patrick Kane, and to a certain degree also Tarasenko, being a big stud in a market for one time and then coming here, it's a lot tougher.
Yeah.
It's a lot tougher getting point A, point B, game days, routines. There's no question, when you stand down by the Zamboni and the visiting teams come out, they are fired up to play the Garden. It is a special place to play. But that being said, playing here, there are some fundamental issues that I think aren't so congruent to being as smooth an operation as you think or you've been accustomed to. So I just think, and then let alone you throw in particularly Patrick Kane. To me, he's a lot quieter guy than I ever assumed he was going to be.
Right. I'm in agreement with that. I mean, he was asking me how I get to MSG and how I get to the practice center. I was cracking up. Like Patrick Kane wants to know how I get to the rink. And I'm like, buddy, I take the subway. I take the Q to the garden. I doubt you're going to be with the rest of us commoners on the Q.
Well, that's like,
the garden.
That's like Ben Harper. I was talking to Ben Harper when he first got here, and it was one of those days where there was practice out in Westchester.
Yeah.
Got to get in. You have your meal, then you get in. You sleep in the hotel, and you got to be kind of walked across to the building. And it's like, he played in Nashville, and he's like, it is different. And and again, it's good, bad, or you make it what it is. But I think the acclimation, and then a little bit like the guys that were acquired last year could fit anywhere in the lineup.
Right.
You Cop could play up in the top six. Vetrano could play up in the top six. Mott was who Mott was. Braun was who Braun was. Now you bring in a couple of Lamborghinis where you've got to figure out how they.
I love that.
how they're going to fit in the top six. And I think by and large it's coming. I think Tarasenko is a little further along than I think than Patrick is. But it's tough for those guys that have been Lamborghinis their whole life, and that you're coming in too. And there's some pretty good players in that top six. Mika is a world-class player, and Chris is a world-class winger in the way he plays. So all in all, I do think they're coming, but it'll be interesting to see tomorrow night in Carolina how it kind of, you got to look at them and now what do you do?
I love that you mentioned, how you came in and the guys that you see guys that you've been playing against your whole career, and you didn't like them, had a preconceived notion about them, and then you're like, I mean, if any other writers are listening, please don't steal my idea. But I'm dying to interview Kane and Vlad just about the two of them coming together on one. They were West Conference rivals for years, these two big guns in the Western Conference, and suddenly they're in a different conference. They find themselves in a different conference in New York, playing on Broadway, chasing a Stanley Cup. Like, did they ever think that their paths would cross here at this moment in time? I'm sure there's got to be some fun stories there, some fun on ice antics and things like that. So I'm really hoping I get a chance to talk to them about that one.
Yeah, no, it's listen, it's what I came to conclude is I'm sure there were plenty of people that I was an idiot. I hope once they got to know me, so listen, I was just trying to do what you got to do to play, right?
Right.
But that, I think by and large, I think most guys in the league are pretty good guys who are just doing what they got to do to survive. So that was the big thing. Like Lindy Ruff, who again, he was running around, Larry Playfair, and guys like that. And then it was really neat to see that side.
So here's the question: who was the guy that you like your entire perception of him changed once you walked into the locker room with him?
It was actually, it might have been Shoney, actually, because I played my first game ever in junior. I was 15 and he was 19 or 20, and he was a big man at 20. I thought he was the biggest player I ever saw, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So you get in, and then you just, and he was a hard player. He was an aggressive player. He was and then you get in and you just, there's an awful lot more going on there than just what you'd assume. So it might have been Shoney, actually. And then Lindy too. Lindy was just the greatest guy, and then on the ice, he'd run you from behind or, do whatever he had to do. So it's fun.
Did you ever play against Turk?
No, I missed him by a year. Missed him by a year or two, and then thank God, because he was in Detroit. He was in Detroit with Probert and Koser, and oh my God, thank God I missed that group.
I feel like we gotta get
He-
someone on
he
here and talk
was-
about Turk.
He
Yeah.
was, he was so tough. He was
Yeah.
tough, and that was an era where you had tough power wingers, and
Yeah.
Right.
you were a power winger, you were expected to score between 30 and 40, and you were expected to pick up between 200, 250 pounds.
Yeah.
No, you were expected to fight, and you were
Yeah.
expected to score. And you had the Shanahans, the Graves. I mean, you can, they're
Oh,
the
McCarty, that
they're
team.
I mean, and Gallant was one of the premier power wingers in the league for maybe half decade. He was tough to handle, and it
Well,
was just a different environment. But that's what was required. If you were going to play, you were going to drop your gloves.
Well, even now when he puts that glare on, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Oh
And
man,
cut through you like glass.
whoa.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I feel like we got to get someone on here that's played against him, played with him,
Yeah.
to really
Yeah.
get some of those fun stories. Because because you could tell that he was he is still just a hard-nosed guy, just in
Yeah.
the way he carries himself and the way that he presents himself. It's really
Right.
really
Right.
evident. I can only imagine what he was like on the ice. I just
And I know he's got a good staff with him, and the game's changed a lot since his parameters. He still expects that honest effort and all those things that were a little simpler during those times. And the player's a lot more complicated or sophisticated.
Yeah, that's
our era,
that's a good transition into thinking about that it's kind of funny I feel like with coaches who are former players, you know about what they were like as players, how they approached the game. So when you see like a guy like Gerard Gallant trying to coach a guy like Vitaly Kravtsov, you could just tell the disconnect there, that he just doesn't see what Vitaly doesn't see, why it was probably difficult for everybody to be on the same page in that locker room when Vitaly was still a Ranger, right?
Yeah, I mean it's clear, but I give him credit that he's found a way to adapt and to impart a lot of the simpler messages that maybe the younger guys now don't hear when they're going through their youth or junior or college. And it's still a man's league. It's still a league where you have to pay a price. And all those things that for the longest time, like I say, it was a little bit simpler, not quite as complicated. But that being said, I think it is a better game for all the things that are going on now.
Definitely.
You're down, and like last night I was down on the sidelines again, and to me it's like NASCAR with no lanes.
Yeah.
It's at top speed, and you're running into everybody, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's an amazing game up close. It really is.
Dave Maloney, Rangers legend. Larry, I know you got to head to practice. Grandpa, wine shopping boy, and as Larry said on the podcast a few weeks ago, brings a wealth of knowledge to the broadcast. So we appreciate the knowledge and the wealth that you bring to us every time, Dave.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure. And at the end of the day, as Freddie Shiro used to say, it's only hockey. So.
Thanks for coming.
It's always a pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and we'll see you guys in Carolina. And Jake, we'll talk next time somewhere down the road, I'm sure, hopefully.
All right, Molly, that does it for episode 118 of Up in the Blue Seats, our Rangers podcast from the New York Post. Thanks to Dave Maloney for joining us. Thanks to Larry Brooks and Dave combined, a little joint session. Love to see it. Thanks to Andrew Hartz and the intern Josh Crawford for helping me produce the show. Catch up on all episodes. Go to the New York Post Sports YouTube. Subscribe there. Give us a thumbs up. Comment below how you're feeling about the blue shirts, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get podcasts. Molly, you've interviewed a lot of cool people. Tuesday night for me at the Reggie screening, that'll be on Amazon Prime, interviewing Reggie Jackson, Mr. October. When you have the nickname Mr. October and you have the nickname Dr. J, you're an icon automatically. Like the Podfather doesn't go anywhere near those. But to interview those two in the same night was cool for me. I know my dad was proud. He two of his favorite all-time athletes. So it was a cool night. But you've got to interview a lot of cool people. Have there been a couple of that realm that you pinch yourself? You're like, holy cow, I'm interviewing this person right now.
I remember it was, I want to say 20, was it still 2020 or 2021? What, it was one of those years. I was at the, oh gosh, what is it called? It was a fundraising event. I can't think of it right now, but I got to interview Mike Richter, and that was pretty awesome. I got to interview him just about Igor Shesterkin and what he had seen from him in his brief time in the league, and that one was a really cool one, especially because I've grown up hearing about Richter from my mom. And that was also one for her that she was more so pinching herself than I was, maybe, but definitely Mike Richter is probably up there for me for sure.
Well, I will text Mike Richter today and we'll get him on the show hopefully in the coming weeks. We've had him on with Ron in the past, so we will have him on here with us. All right, Mike Richter. That's a good one. I thought you any other sport? Was there any baseball? Because you did cover a little
yeah,
baseball.
I've done it
That's
all.
what I was curious. Outside hockey, I want to know.
Outside of hockey, I didn't actually interview her. I was just in the interview room, but Serena Williams, her last match, I covered it. I covered her last match. I covered her last doubles match with Venus. I count it just being in the room and listening to her in person, but easily that was probably one of the coolest things I've ever gotten to cover in my entire career. And for the rest of my life, I'll be able to say that I watched Serena Williams' last career match, and that's a big one. That's a big one.
That's the GOAT right there. So that is a good one. All right, good stuff from Mollie Walker, Larry Brooks, Dave Maloney, Andrew Hartz. I'm Jake Brown. We'll be back with another episode. Only a few more left in the regular season before playoff hockey is here. Thanks everybody for listening to Up in the Blue Seats. We'll talk to you next week.